He never took a single pill. Not for his heart. Not for his bones. Not even when he turned 90. And yet, he lived joyfully, healthily, and peacefully, all the way to 102. This is the story of Mr. Haruto. And the morning ritual that changed everything. Chapter 1, He woke up with the sun. Every morning, as the first golden light slipped quietly through the thin paper windows of his home in rural Japan, Haruto would open his eyes not with alarm, but with reverence. He did not own a clock beside his bed. He never needed one. For over 60 years, the sun had been his faithful companion, a gentle, unwavering reminder that life still had something to offer. Unlike the hurried world outside, Haruto's mornings began in stillness. He never jumped out of bed. He never reached for his phone, because he didn't own one. Instead, he lay still for a few breaths, soaking in the quiet miracle of being alive. To him, waking up was not just a physical act, it was spiritual. Before he sat up, before his feet ever touched the ground, Haruto whispered 3 simple phrases into the morning air: I'm alive. Thank you. I'm ready. These words weren't part of a religion or a routine. They were part of his being. A quiet gratitude that softened the sharp edges of age. His breath was slow, deliberate. He said it taught his heart to follow, to stay calm even when the world wasn't. In those early minutes, nothing else existed, not age, not illness, not memory. Only breath. Only now. The warmth of the futon, the faint chirping of birds outside, the distant sound of wind moving through bamboo, all of these became part of his waking. He didn't wake up, he woke into the world. At 102, his bones didn't move like they once did. But he never saw his body as broken. These creaks, he would say, are my years speaking. I listen. His joints may have slowed, but his spirit had quickened. When he finally sat up, he would take one more pause, resting his hand gently over his heart. Still beating, he'd smile. Still here. That simple act, acknowledging life, was his daily dose of joy. Medicine, he believed, began in the mind. Haruto never drank coffee. He didn't need a jolt of energy. The sun was his stimulant, the breath his tonic. His clarity didn't come from caffeine, it came from simplicity. He chose not to complicate his mornings with anything artificial. He would open his wooden window and inhale the fresh, crisp air. Today smells different, he'd whisper. Every day, to him, carried its own scent, a living proof that life hadn't gone stale. He walked barefoot, always, even in winter. The cold floors reminded him he was alive. The earth grounded him, literally. He believed walking without shoes sent a message to his body: you still belong here. Outside, he would stand facing east, eyes closed, letting the sun touch his face. We meet again, he'd whisper, as though greeting an old friend. And in many ways, the sun was his friend, patient, warm, dependable. His neighbors found it strange, this old man with his quiet rituals. But they also noticed something: he was rarely sick. He never complained. He had a softness to his face that most people lost by 60. When asked why he never got ill, Haruto would answer without hesitation: because I never rushed the morning. To him, sickness was not just a body out of balance, it was a life out of rhythm. And rhythm, he said, always begins at dawn. He believed waking slowly gave the body time to remember itself. To heal, to align, to return. While others shocked their systems with alarms and screens, he invited his gently into harmony with the rising day. There were no distractions, no noise, no urgency. Just him, the sun, the soil, and his breath. This was his pharmacy. This was his sanctuary. And for 102 years, it never failed him. Haruto often said, how you meet the morning decides how the world meets you. He chose to meet each day with reverence, not resistance. With calm, not complaint. With presence, not pressure. And perhaps that's why, long after friends his age had passed, long after his hair had turned silver and then white, Haruto still woke up every morning, gently, softly, gratefully, with the sun. Chapter 2, He started with silence. Haruto's morning truly began after he stepped outside and stood in the silence of his garden. While others might reach for music, television, or conversation, Haruto reached for nothing. He embraced the hush. The quiet, he believed, was not empty, it was full of answers. He would sit cross-legged on the wooden engawa, the veranda that overlooked his tiny garden, and simply listen. To the wind brushing past the leaves. To the distant caw of a crow. To the way silence made the world visible. In stillness, he said, the invisible becomes known. There was no effort to meditate. No technique. No chanting. He just sat. With his breath. With his presence. With the morning. The silence wrapped around him like an old robe. Familiar. Worn. And comforting. He often said, noise makes the mind busy. But silence, it makes the heart speak. At 1:02, his hearing was not perfect, but his listening was sharper than ever. He didn't need ears to hear the truth, he needed quiet. In the silence, he did not replay the past or worry about the future. He rested in what was. The crisp air, the shape of the clouds, the steam rising from his cup of tea. These became his teachers, and their language was silence. People thought silence meant loneliness. Haruto laughed at that. Silence is only lonely if you are afraid of yourself, he once said. For him, silence was not absence, it was presence. The presence of life in its simplest, most beautiful form. When the wind would pass through the bamboo grove, he called it the breath of the mountain. He imagined the trees whispering secrets to him. And in some way, maybe they were. His eyes would often glisten, though he said nothing. There was no need. He would watch ants move across a rock, or dew slide from a leaf's edge, and he'd smile like a child seeing magic. The world is always speaking, he said. But you must be very quiet to hear it. He believed silence healed more than medicine. It calmed his heartbeat. It softened his thoughts. It made him feel younger, not in body, but in wonder. And wonder, he believed, was what kept a man truly alive. He refused to fill his mornings with tasks. He wasn't being lazy, he was being present. He didn't see the value in rushing. To him, every second wasted in noise was a second stolen from peace. Sometimes, he would sit in silence for 20 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. But never with a clock. Time was not his master. He followed a different rhythm, one that could only be heard when everything else was quiet. This silence was his sanctuary. It gave him clarity. It reminded him that he didn't have to chase life. Life, if you waited in stillness, would come and sit beside you. He believed that many illnesses of the modern world were born from noise, the noise of ambition, of comparison, of overthinking. The body can rest, he said, but if the mind is noisy, rest is a lie. So every morning, he practiced this sacred act, doing nothing. Listening to everything. He was not meditating. He was remembering. Remembering that he was alive. That life was still a miracle, even in the quietest moments. Haruto often told visitors, don't underestimate stillness. It can grow flowers in the darkest places. His life was proof of that. While others searched for secrets in books, pills, or procedures, he found them in silence. And perhaps that's why, when people met Haruto, they always left calmer. Not because he said something profound, but because he reminded them, through silence, that they already knew what mattered. Chapter 3, He moved with intention. After his moment of silence, Haruto would rise, not with haste, but with grace. His movements were not hurried or harsh. They were soft, deliberate, and full of care, as though each gesture was a conversation with life itself. His body, though over a century old, moved like a well-worn river, slow, deep, and purposeful. He did not engage in modern exercise. No gym, no treadmill, no high-intensity routine. Instead, he practiced a personal ritual of slow stretches and balance. Gentle twists of the torso. Lifting arms to the sky. Breathing with each motion. He called it body remembering. Not training, not forcing, just remembering how to be alive inside a human frame. Haruto believed that movement should be an act of respect, not punishment. When you love something, he said, you move it with kindness. That's how he treated his limbs, not as burdens, but as blessings. Not as weak parts of age, but as living records of all he had survived. Each morning, he would walk slowly around his garden, hands behind his back, toes feeling the earth with each step. He would pause to lift one leg, then the other, practicing balance. Not to perform. Not to impress. Just to become steady. He said, the body learns balance the same way the heart does, one quiet correction at a time. These small movements were not dramatic. But they were sacred. To Haruto, moving was a way of saying thank you, to his legs, to his spine, to the life that still flowed through him. He believed every stretch was a celebration. Every breath, a second chance. He did not fear falling. Falling, he said, is what taught me how to rise. He had fallen many times, in the field, in the bath, once even from a ladder, but he never let fear stop his body from moving. In fact, he believed that the more you stop moving out of fear, the more the body begins to forget. So he kept moving. Slowly. Steadily. With a rhythm that was not about strength, but about presence. While others pursued youth by force, Haruto pursued it through harmony. His movements were not about changing his body, but loving it. He often did his stretches facing the sun, letting the warmth melt tension in his joints. The sun loosens sorrow from the bones, he would say. He let its light be part of his healing, not just physically, but emotionally. His favorite movement was lifting both hands slowly upward while breathing in, then lowering them gently while breathing out. He did this 10 times, every morning. Not because someone told him to, but because it made him feel human, rooted, and light. Even brushing his teeth, washing his face, or tying his robe, all were done with calm attention. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was wasted. Every movement, he said, is a chance to return home to yourself. This intentional motion gave him clarity throughout the day. He never felt stiff. He rarely felt pain. And when he did, he would smile at it like an old friend who'd stopped by to say, "Remember me?" He welcomed the pain, not because he enjoyed it, but because it reminded him, "You're still alive." He never aimed to be strong. He aimed to be connected. To his body. To the earth. To the quiet rhythm that flowed through all living things. And in that connection, he found peace. Many people feared losing mobility as they aged. But Haruto didn't fear it, because he stayed close to movement. Every day, he spoke to his muscles, his bones, his joints, not with words, but with gentle motion. He believed that the body is a garden. And movement is how we water it. Without movement, even the most beautiful body will wither. But with care, with patience, and with intention, even the oldest body can bloom. So every morning, before the world asked anything of him, he gave something first to himself, gentle motion. He didn't need a prescription. His body already knew the way, as long as he listened. And that is how he moved. Not for exercise. Not for show. But as a morning conversation with the miracle that was still breathing beneath his skin. Chapter 4, He drank from the earth. After his body had awakened and moved with grace, Haruto would return inside to a small wooden table by the window. There, without fail, a simple clay cup awaited him, filled with warm water and the quiet aroma of roasted barley tea. This was not just a drink. It was a ritual. He never started his day with sugar, caffeine, or anything loud. Instead, he drank something ancient. Something his grandfather once brewed. Roasted barley tea, mujica, was his morning medicine, although he never called it that. To him, it was just the way mornings were meant to taste. Before he took the first sip, he would always pause. He would hold the cup in both hands, close his eyes, and breathe in deeply. "This comes from the earth," he'd whisper. "And so do I." That single moment of gratitude transformed a simple drink into a sacred offering. The warmth of the tea grounded him. He said it reminded his body to soften. That warmth, traveling down his throat, into his chest, and deep into his belly, felt like the sun moving inside him. It didn't jolt him awake like coffee. It invited him into presence. He drank slowly. Always slowly. Haruto never gulped. Never drank while walking. He believed drinking was a form of communication, between body and nature. And like all good conversations, it deserved time. The tea wasn't sweet. It wasn't meant to be. It carried the flavor of toasted earth, like the edge of harvest and firewood. That bitterness, he said, taught the tongue to appreciate life's quieter gifts. He rotated his teas with the seasons, sometimes sencha, sometimes ginger water, sometimes boiled mushrooms, but barley tea was always the anchor. It cooled the blood, he believed. Cleared the mind. It asked nothing but attention. What mattered to Haruto wasn't what he drank, but how he drank. He said, "If you drink in a rush, you swallow stress. But if you drink with intention, you nourish more than your body, you nourish your soul." He never added sugar. Never added milk. Never bought anything pre-made. He boiled the water himself. Picked the barley himself. He believed that preparing something with your own hands gave it a different energy. "A drink made by hands," he said, "has the warmth of the heart." Even the cup mattered. Haruto used the same clay cup for over 40 years. It had a crack down the side, repaired with gold powder, a traditional kintsugi line. "The cup is old," he would say, "but it still holds warmth. Like me." He drank facing the window, always. He liked to feel the morning light on his skin while the earth's drink touched his lips. "Sunlight and tea," he smiled, "that's enough medicine for me." Visitors sometimes offered him other drinks. Juice, coffee, supplements. He always declined politely. "My body knows this," he said, holding up his simple tea. "It does not recognize those others." He didn't drink to escape. He drank to connect. To the barley, to the water, to the fire that boiled it. He called it drinking the story of the soil. And he believed that when you drink with awareness, the body listens better. This morning ritual didn't just hydrate him. It reminded him that life didn't have to be complex to be nourishing. He didn't need flavors to be entertained. He needed truth, and the earth always told it best. Haruto never needed energy drinks. He never asked for artificial boosts. He believed that if you begin the day with something living, something simple, something slow, the body would remember how to sustain itself. And so, each morning, he drank not from a bottle, not from a brand, but from the earth, and in that warmth, he found something deeper than refreshment. He found alignment. For over 4 decades, that cup of tea was the first thing he consumed. And perhaps, in the end, it wasn't just tea. It was stillness made drinkable. It was sunlight made warm. It was gratitude made liquid. Chapter 5, He fed his soul before his stomach. Long before any food touched his lips, Haruto always nourished something else first, his soul. Breakfast could wait. The world could wait. But his inner life? That was the first guest he served each morning. He said, "If the spirit is hungry, no food will satisfy." He didn't start his day with toast or rice or soup. He started it with words, old poems, short proverbs, or quiet conversations with memory. Each morning, he would open a small book filled with inked pages, some ancient, some handwritten by friends long gone. He would read them not for knowledge, but for grounding. Sometimes he read aloud. Sometimes only his eyes moved. But always, there was a stillness that came over him, as though the words were wrapping around his heart like a warm shawl. The wisdom of centuries entered him like breath. Slowly. Deeply. Haruto believed that feeding the mind was as essential as feeding the body. An empty mind is a noisy one, he said. But a fed mind is quiet, and clear. He didn't chase new ideas. He returned to the old ones, the ones that had weathered time and still held their shape. One of his favorite verses was, "Even on the cloudiest morning, the sun has not forgotten you." He would whisper it to himself while looking out the window, reminding his soul that light is always present, even when hidden. After reading, he would sit in quiet reflection. He didn't analyze the words. He let them sink. He believed that wisdom worked like water on stone, not in pressure, but in patience. Let the words do their work, he would say. Your job is only to welcome them. He also kept a small notebook beside his tea. In it, he would write a single sentence each day, something he had learned, something he had noticed, something he had remembered. This ritual became his slow diary, a record of quiet revelations. Haruto believed that the heart, like the body, grows thin if it is not fed. And so, each morning, before any food, he gave it attention. He listened to what it longed for. Sometimes it wanted silence. Sometimes prayer. Sometimes the laughter of a memory. He would recall old friends, old songs, old mistakes, but always without judgment. He said, memory is not a prison. It's a path. Walk it gently. And so, he let his heart walk each morning, step by step, until it found peace. Only after this inner nourishment would he begin to think of food. And even then, there was no rush. His body had learned to trust that he would not forget it. And so, it waited patiently, knowing it was not the center, but a companion. Visitors who stayed with him would be surprised. Don't you want breakfast right away? They'd ask. And he would smile, pointing to his chest. I already ate, he'd say. In here. His way of life was not about denial. It was about priorities. He simply believed that the soul, when strong, made the rest of life easier to carry. And if the soul began the day full, then the body would follow. Sometimes he would sing an old lullaby while waiting for the rice to steam. Not loudly. Just under his breath. As though the song was for his younger self, the little boy who had once faced war, hunger, and loss. The song told that boy, you made it. This habit of feeding his soul gave him a kind of glow that food never could. It made his eyes soft, his voice kind, his decisions calm. He didn't just age, he deepened. And perhaps that is why Haruto remained so clear in his later years. No dementia. No fog. Just presence. Just calm. Just the quiet power of a man who remembered to feed the invisible first. For Haruto, the morning was not about filling the stomach as quickly as possible. It was about filling the center, that sacred place within where peace and purpose sleep. And every morning, he gently woke it up. Chapter 6, he tended to one living thing. Before breakfast, before errands, before conversations with anyone else, Haruto would spend a quiet moment with something living. A plant. A flower. A bird that had built its nest nearby. He believed every life form deserved to be acknowledged. He called this his morning communion. It didn't matter what it was. A single bonsai tree on the porch. A wilted rose. Even weeds growing between stones. Haruto believed all living things held wisdom, and by tending to one each morning, he was tending to himself. He never pruned hastily. Never watered by routine. He would kneel slowly, examine the leaves, touch the soil, feel the stem. A plant speaks, he said. but only to the hands that listen. His fingers were old, but gentle, full of history, full of care. Even in winter, when little grew, he would find something, a patch of moss, a branch, a dry pod. He would study it with the reverence of a scholar. This too is part of the cycle, he would whisper. Not dead. Just waiting. His neighbors often saw him early in the morning, crouched in the dirt with a small watering can. He moved like a man in prayer. Quiet. Intentional. As if the ground beneath him were sacred, and he was merely a guest. Haruto believed caring for life outside yourself reminded you that you are not alone. That the world is not just your story, it is full of other small, silent stories unfolding beside you. He kept a tiny garden, not for show, not for harvest, but for companionship. It had no rows, no fences, no symmetry. Just wild life, growing, bending, sometimes breaking, always returning. Much like himself. Sometimes, he'd speak softly to a leaf as if to an old friend. You've made it through another night, he'd say. So have I. He saw no difference between the resilience of a plant and the resilience of a man. His favorite plant was a small white chrysanthemum he'd been tending for over 20 years. It had nearly died during a storm. But he brought it back, day by day, with water, shade, and quiet presence. You teach me patience, he told it once. You teach me not to give up. Visitors were puzzled at first. Why spend so much time on a single flower? Why talk to trees? But over time, they began to feel it too, the gentle wisdom that came from noticing life in its smallest forms. Haruto said, when you care for something weaker than you, you become stronger. He believed that compassion was not something you practiced in emergencies, it was something you built, one morning at a time. His hands bore the stains of soil. His knees the imprint of stone. But his face? It bore peace. Because every day, he remembered that he was part of a living world, not its master, but its student. The act of tending made him slow down. It returned him to his breath. It made the aches in his joints feel lighter, the passing of time feel kinder. He wasn't fixing nature, he was aligning with it. Some mornings, the plant didn't need watering. But he still visited. It's not about doing something, he'd say. It's about being with something. That was Haruto's deepest lesson, not every morning needs productivity. Sometimes, it only needs presence. This daily ritual softened him.